Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into a question that trips up so many people.
You know the feeling, right? It's super frustrating, incredibly confusing, but believe it or not, it happens all the time. So today, we're going to unpack the really surprising legal principle that explains exactly why this happens.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll get into the core conflict. Then we'll check out two really different scenarios that show what's going on. We'll even ask if someone's motive changes anything. And then we'll wrap it all up with the big takeaway. Okay, first things first. To really get a handle on this, we've got to break down two key terms. Now, they might sound kind of similar, but trust me, in the eyes of the law, they are worlds apart. So, on one hand, we have damnum. Just think of this as actual real-world harm. It's the stuff you can literally see and feel. You know, losing money, your property getting damaged, a real financial hit. It's the damage part of this whole puzzle. And on the other hand, there's injuria. Now, this is a totally different beast. This isn't about tangible harm, it's all about your rights. Injuria is when one of your legally protected rights gets violated. Think about something like your right to vote or your personal freedom. That's injuria. Okay, so here's where it all comes together. The Law of Torts basically hinges on these two old Latin phrases. You've got Injuria Sine Damnum, which means a violation of your rights, but with no actual harm. And then you've got its opposite, Damnum Sine Injuria, where you've suffered real harm, but no legal right was actually broken. And as we're about to find out, the law treats these two situations very, very differently. All right, let's dive into our first scenario, injury without damage. And this is where things start to get really wild, because you can actually have a solid legal case and win, even if you can't prove you lost a single cent. And to see how this works, we've got to go back to a classic case from our source material, Ashby versus White. Seriously, this case is the bedrock of this whole legal idea. So, here's the story. A guy named Mr. Ashby, totally qualified to vote, shows up to the polls, and an official illegally blocks him, stops him from casting his vote. Now here's the twist. The candidate he was going to vote for, he won the election anyway. So you could say, no harm, no foul, right? Ashby didn't lose any money, the outcome was the same, but he sued. He took the official to court. And the court's ruling came down to this really powerful idea from the Chief Justice. He basically said, look, the violation of a right is the damage. It doesn't matter if it cost the party a farthing. The court totally agreed with Ashby. His fundamental right to vote was trampled on, and that alone was enough for him to win. And don't think this is just some dusty old principle from the history books. We see it in more modern cases too, like one from our source material involving Beam Singh. He was an elected official who was unlawfully arrested and detained by police. And because of that, he missed a really important assembly session. So what happened? Well, the Supreme Court ruled that his fundamental right to personal liberty had been violated. And get this, even though he couldn't show any specific financial loss, the court awarded him 50,000 rupees. They called them exemplary damages. Basically, money awarded to make a point and send a clear message. You cannot illegally mess with people's fundamental rights. Okay. So we've seen what happens when your rights are violated without harm. Now let's completely flip this on its head and look at the other side of the coin, which honestly can feel way more confusing. This is when you suffer real, actual damage, but the law says, sorry, you've got no case. And the perfect story to illustrate this is the old Gloucester Grammar School case. It's an incredible example of how legal competition can cause real pain, even when everything is technically by the book. So picture this. You've got this established grammar school doing its thing. Then, all of a sudden, a new schoolmaster sets up shop, literally right next door. And to grab students, the new guy slashes his prices. I mean, he cuts them way down. And just like that, the original school starts losing students, losing money. They're getting hammered. So what do? They sue. And you can see just how bad it was. Their fees dropped from £40 all the way down to just $12. That is a huge financial blow. There was absolutely no question that they suffered real, tangible harm, real damnum. But the court came back with a crystal clear ruling. The new schoolmaster hadn't broken any laws. He was perfectly within his rights to open a school and charge whatever he wanted. The original school may have been harmed financially, but none of their legal rights had been violated. There was no injuria. And so, no case. It was pure damage without a legal injury. Okay, so at this point you're probably thinking,
All right, I get it for fair competition, but what if someone's doing it just to be a jerk? What if their motive is pure malice? Surely that has to matter in court, right?
Well, that is an excellent question, and the law has a fascinating answer for it, which we can find in the case of Bradford Corporation versus Pickles.
So check out this setup. A guy named Mr. Pickles owns land, and underneath his land is the water source for the entire town of Bradford. Mr. Pickles decides he wants the town to buy his land for a ton of money. So, to pressure them, and basically just out of pure spite, he starts digging on his property and diverts the water. The town's water supply starts drying up. So, of course, the town sues him, saying, hey, he's only doing this to hurt us.
And the verdict is honestly pretty shocking. The court sided with Mr. Pickles. The ruling was that because he was doing something perfectly legal on his own property, he had the right to that water. His terrible motive didn't matter one bit. A bad intention can't make a legal act illegal.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together now. We've seen these wild cases, and there's a really clear line the law is drawing. So the big question is, why? Why does this critical distinction between actual harm and a legal injury even exist? And here it is, the big takeaway. The law of torts isn't there to protect you from every single bad thing that might happen to you. It's not a shield against all the bumps and bruises or financial losses of life. Its main job, its primary goal, is to protect your specific, legally defined rights. The system basically says, yeah, lawful competition might hurt someone's business, but that's not a legal wrong. But on the flip side, it says your fundamental rights are so important that just violating them is a wrong that needs to be fixed, even if you're not at a single dime. And all of this leaves us with a really big question to think about. The law draws this very distinct line, right? It puts protecting legal rights above protecting us from all harm. But is that the right balance? Where do you think that line should be drawn?
Thanks for watching. Download the PDF in the description below.